Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 563 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexey Arestovych, and in this format with Nikolai Feldman and Yuri Romanenko. Special thanks go to Bill and to Bikers. Thank you guys for supporting our work. And of course, thank you our channel members. You guys make our work much easier to do. And with this, here is day 563. Enjoy. Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. You're watching War Diaries with Alexey Arestovych. We're streaming live on Alexey's channel, on Yuri Romanenko's channel, and of course here on Alpha&Omega. And Alexey and Yuri are already with us. They have connected, so good evening, gentlemen. Let's probably start with the map and analyze what happened there during the last 24 hours on the front. Our military forces continue counteroffensive on Melitopol direction and storm actions on the Bakhmut direction. And we have some successes near Kleshcheevka and near Robotina. So I cannot say we have drastic changes here, but we definitely have more blue zones showing up. What do we know? We know that our troops are moving here on the flanks, and Russian command is trying to decide to go to some counterattacks here and to try to stop us. They are really concerned about our motion towards Ocheretina, from where the mouse hand is towards the southeast, in the general direction of fortified circle. You can see that on the map. Why? Because there is a road. There is a road that connects Novoprokopivka and Verbovoye. And if our troops continue this motion, it will break that communication line between the right flank and the left flank of their front, and will not allow them to move the troops quickly left to right, right to left. They tried to do some counterattacks on us a couple of days ago, last week, basically, when they wasted one of their top troops and had to basically withdraw and refit it after that failure. So they're trying to bring more effort. Our troops continue the motion, and they're trying, in essence, to stop us there. Is it the same thing that's happening in Bakhmut and Kleshcheevka? No, there it's a little different. Near Kleshcheevka, especially close to Andreevka, they are not feeling well because they're not able to hold the motion of our troops. And it is not that they started running or we moved by dozens of kilometers. No, it's basically dozens of, I would say, fraction of a kilometer. Could have been half a kilometer, but very important half a kilometer. So in essence, there is a very fortified position along the railroad, which is difficult to cross, difficult to breach. But according to some of the data that is being discussed on the Russian side, our troops have already crossed it and make their situation horrible to defend at this point. They're still trying to hold us and do not let us continue with our motion, and that's going down south near Zaporozhye and Donetsky front, and they're trying to block our motion there. And of course, General Novodonetsk in all general direction to Kremenchuk, they're trying to drop some reserves there. We understand what kind of reserves are. They're usually territorial defense type reserves, not really well trained, but they're still putting some human bodies on the way. And they're also trying to regroup on Bakhmut direction. Unfortunately for them, their regroupings do not really succeed in achieving anything. And they have 83rd Brigade, which is supposed to be a good one, that they were hoping will be able to stop us in our motion there. They're trained on special military intel training centers, but they are failing and they cannot hold us. They continue losing their positions there. So regardless of how they regroup, they have to step back. And also up north in Liman, they are trying to continue attacking, pushing on us. But as a result of their failures to do that, we actually managed to capture some of the territory, and in 300 yards, 500 yards, it doesn't seem like much, but when this happens on the front, these are depends upon the front. In some parts, that means a huge success. And as a summary, they have no success moving forward wherever they try. And that's basically all the events on the front, right? Right. This is the somewhat medium-intensive dynamics on the front. There are no major, big, large actions. Both sides are bringing their reserves and preparing for the fights that now one can see on the map where they likely will happen, near Prokopyevka and Verbavuya, and that Robotin area, and that line towards Zavetное Желание and the motion to Kremenchuk, and of course to the north of Bakhmut. So the shape of the battlefront and the actions of our troops already indicated what is going to happen, and our troops are getting ready to continue our forward motion, and they are trying to prepare to block us. And I think more intensive fighting will ensue in several days, and we'll see how it unfolds. I suspect we will be successful. I would bet on us rather than them, because I think our motion and our liberation of our territories will continue successfully. Okay, Alexey, the other point is that we are observing them trying to conduct some sort of elections on the occupied territories. And according to some of their reports, despite these being new territories and the front being not too far, they already observe high percentage of people coming to vote. I do have a question, Nikolai, here. That's funny. I wonder if it's 146 or 176%. Of course, there might be some collaborants, although probably wouldn't even get to a real percent. It would be maybe 50 or 100 men that help them, but that's about it. And maybe those who are also totally dependent on them, perhaps, I guess, who are living on the pensions or something, that, and some subsidies that can come only from them, and they use it to force people to vote. But I don't think this is remaining population on these territories at large. Most of them do not want to get involved in military crimes, which this voting is. And we also know the other side, that right now their correspondents are saying that it is very different even from what they call Chechen war back in the day, because they cannot really do anything here. They cannot sleep, otherwise somebody will indicate that that's where they are, and the missile or Ukrainian shell may find them. They cannot even buy things on the market, because they, there are a lot of cases when they drink milk, eat honey, and then fall down with poisoning. Recently, there was a curious video from Crimea when the guy putting his goods on the shelf or telling that on the camera that, oh, it's okay, Ukrainian military will be here and will kick you all out. So with these moods, I don't know what kind of election can they have there. I sincerely wonder what number will they draw. We can, make bets here, and if you guys want to predict something, just put something in the chat. Guys, what does it matter? What do they draw? For the whole civilized world, I'm not even talking about Ukraine here, just our allies and other countries, regardless of what they draw, even if they draw 500 or 400%, it will not affect anything. Ukraine will not acknowledge that. The world will not acknowledge that. They might send, China might send some Chinese bloggers to perform on these new territories, which is interesting that China is now activating some of their motion and some of their things, and they've been numerous times coming out and saying that they do support territorial integrity. And then in Mariupol, last week we've seen their blogger and one of the girls even sang Russian song Katyusha and the remnants of that bombed theater. So, Alexey, what do you think? Why China all of a sudden is activating? I think this is an event towards the G20 summit, probably some kind of pushback, given that Biden already spoke twice about Xi Jinping not coming to that event. So there are probably some disagreements between China and the United States, and I'm not sure what about. Could be about weapons supplies, or maybe about US trying to punish China for gray dual-use goods that are supplying to Russia. So maybe they're trying to test their reaction. And depends upon how it goes. We'll see two versions. That blogger will either be punished by China, or perhaps will intensify again and bring her out and maybe highlight her performance on YouTube. So China, as they often do, they show their upsetness, their upset situation about something, and they're usually going in a roundabout way. That's very common for China. The fact that they will not review their position on territorial integrity, none of the important countries in the world is eager to do that, change their position on this, because they have a lot of questionable territories themselves. But small pokes like that, like a blogger singing Katyusha for Russian army in the destroyed theater, which Russia has bombed and killed hundreds of kids and women there and wounded. So they're just demonstrating their upsetness of certain processes that are happening, and doing it in a symbolic way. So it'll be curious to see how it unfolds. G20 is actually going now, right? And there are a lot of interesting news coming from it. We can start with the one that the spokesperson for Ukrainian International Affairs Administration Ministry already came out and said that the statement that some of the G20s countries have signed, doesn't satisfy Ukrainian point of view, and it goes against the Ukrainian statement that you should not be deciding anything about Ukraine without Ukraine being involved. And they're also calling that a conflict, but they're not calling it an aggression, and there's no message to stop this aggression in that statement that they've signed. What do you say about it? So G20 is a very interesting group. They a very strange group. You know, the group is being usually characterized by their opportunity and capability to enforce certain politics together, jointly. Why G7 is considered, countries of G7 play such a role, and G7 as an org plays a role, because these countries, you would not be able to pick them apart and play different politics with each of them. They usually follow the same suit if they agreed about something. G20, you would never go play with the whole G20 as a group like that, because they're a group of different countries with different interests. It's often called sub-United Nations or UN for Poor, or things like that. So unfortunately or fortunately, G20 really doesn't have teeth. They are very different countries. They're very differently oriented countries. There are countries that are very strongly in the Western agenda, and there are other countries that are still playing their anti-colonial policies. Very different countries. Just Prime Minister of India coming there with a new plaque that says Bharat, which is essentially a new old way of calling India. This is their attempt to fight against imperial British influence for a few hundred years, and they're trying to use their original ancient name instead. So these countries, it's questionable what kind of declaration can they sign, what effort can it have. But even in the statement that they signed, it still talks about territorial integrity of Ukraine, right, and the need to resolve things peacefully. So despite us being invited to G20, we got some meaning still from that declaration. And the main point that they at least confirm territorial integrity, and this is one of our backbone principles, and once again, G20 even also confirmed the same thing, so we can appeal at least to that. There is a diplomatic minimum in it, but in general, they were trying to solve another set of questions there, because they cannot, even though they cannot discuss things really without Ukraine, but they had to address some things about the supplies of grains, and they have some countries that are directly interested in it, so they were trying to figure some solutions for that. So we probably shouldn't have expected much from the G20 meeting, but something is happening between China and the United States, because Biden has already expressed the fact that Xi Jinping is amiss, and China has not reacted to that, besides sending their bloggers to Mariupol. So there probably will something come out soon that we can analyze what's really going on there between them. Prime Minister of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, is appealing to members of G20 to try to follow through with the grain deal and some guarantees for Russia, and trying to push Moscow to be connected back to international system SWIFT and lift some of the sanctions from them. Not Moscow, Nikolai, but their agriculture bank that is dealing with the grain side of things, supposedly. And there was leaked an interesting demand via some of the media from Russia that they demand that Russian ships, Russian vessels would not be attacked in Azov and Black Seas. So these Russians are interesting fellas. They are starting the war, they're launching missiles, they're destroying Ukrainian ports and ships, and then they come out and say, do not attack us. So maybe not even shoot at their troops as well. And our foreign affairs already came out and said, do not deal with Russians, because why you shouldn't be doing it? Because they're creating these platforms for blackmail, and if they work, they'll create new ones. On this background, we got another interesting piece of information. Britain said that they will provide support to the vessels. Initially, somebody translated that as escorting vessels that are doing the grain trade in the Ukrainian waters. I went to reread the original article, and yeah, it was a mistaken error in translation. They actually meant that they will increase our intelligence capabilities in order to provide data for vessels dealing with Ukraine and transferring grain out of Ukraine. And Americans also said that they'll send additional troops, additional forces in the region to provide some security to the trade vessels. And I'm thinking that maybe intensified presence of NATO in the Black Sea might have been something that caused China to be upset, because they have a somewhat similar naval theme down south, and them seeing how NATO is actively participating in providing additional security to vessels may have upset them. But that's just my supposition, I don't know. But in general, that both Great Britain and United States jointly said that, or separately rather, but still said at the same time that they're going to intensify their presence in the sea, and even United States are talking about ATACMS transfer again. It just shows that this grain deal subject and Russia interfering with it is really pissing everybody off, and it seems like they want to be more decisive to find a solution to that. President of Romania today appealed to General Secretary of NATO in regards to the crashing of Russian UAVs on the Romanian territory, and he actually expressed decisive protest, a note of protest to Russia, and brought it as a concern within NATO countries. So basically, Russia is using NATO airspace to conduct military operations in Ukraine. United States and Britain said, okay, we are concerned about it. We'll add more jets, we'll add more satellite intel, and some our own UAVs. And this is an interesting example, a very curious example of actions by United States and Britain. And this is sub-level actions by these countries. A typical example of that would be an event that Russia did a while ago when they shot down US drone over the Black Sea, when they essentially caused the drone to fall down. They didn't shoot at it as well, but they caused it to fall. So this is something that is not exactly war, right? But it does bring a message. They did destroy a UAV. And Russian method of waging their wars very often were positioned to be sub-level towards NATO. So NATO would not know how to resolve these things or quickly resolve these things. Because NATO, as a collective organ with consultations of 32 countries in a single bloc, nothing quickly can happen. Nothing fast can happen. And a ton of these small sub-level pokes, they do change things. And for example, Russia was using airspace of Moldova or airspace of Romania to attack Ukrainian positions. So NATO needed to react to that. And before that, there were some warnings or some very roundabout transfers of some equipment that eventually did harm the Russians, but there was no direct answer to it. And as a result, their capability suffered and public opinion suffered because Putin's friends were getting stronger and public opinion was questioning, is NATO even capable to resist? And now they are trying their own sub-level actions because increasing the intel capabilities and positioning American aviation in Romania, that is now being discussed, is already increasing their presence near the war theater with a certain goal. So if American jets will start shooting down Russian UAVs that are flying in the Romanian territory, that will be a very interesting situation when they're in general not fighting openly with Russia, but they are effectively destroying some of their equipment. And if that happens, that will shift the war to a new situation, a new stance, when NATO is actually conducting active sub-level efforts to preclude Russia from attacking NATO countries or using NATO countries in their war with Ukraine. And NATO is wrapping up in this message as attack on Russia trying to weaponize hunger and use hunger as a blackmail tool globally. So that's the angle they're playing now. Guys, I have another mention here. I think with all these things unfolding, Odessa area and Bessarabia will turn into the second most capable air defense regions in Ukraine because they become somewhat key gates for export of grains and any other agriculture goods. And I think our allies finally understanding that they can work with Ukraine, avoiding Russia, and they can use Romanian capabilities via Danube and then by the Romanian sea waters, and that can be only expanded because Russia would not be able to interfere with these channels, and then not being able to interfere with them, it lowers Russian capacity to blackmail the world. Otherwise, Ukraine and the world are losing, and the hunger is a real perspective for some countries. So I suspect that we'll see an increase in our air defense capabilities. We already see that we'll be getting new Gepards in order to defend our energy sectors, but I'm thinking it's not only for energy substations, but also for logistic chains that exist in the south. Because if we plug that aerial hole in Bessarabia, which, as you noticed, exists now, then it'll be much more difficult for Russia to hit the western Ukraine and those logistics and other strategic targets that they look at on the western Ukraine, because they've been using this channel, this corridor, to get to them. You're right, Yuri. We have more Gepards coming to us, more notions of that are coming in the media. We already have 40 of them, but we'll be getting even more. So it's an interesting angle that is forming up here. Both him and Erdogan, Putin and Erdogan, they're not holders of that deal. They're just actors within that deal. And they're trying to appeal, Putin via Erdogan is trying to appeal to the world to lift some sanctions and to allow Russia to trade more. And what does the West react, in what manner does the West react to that? The West basically intensifies their previous stance and coming out with supplying more air defense to Ukraine and actually ignoring these requests. So what they're doing, they're in essence indicating that they have another solution. They do not really care about Putin's demands. And this is an interesting turn, interesting play against Russian blackmail on this market. So I wanted to ask here, both of you, Yuri and Alexey, in the context of Turkey, because they got some bonuses trying to be an intermediary for the grain deal. Because if we scroll back, remember, Britain even threatened to bring their own ships into the Black Sea, and when Turkey took it upon themselves to be a guarantor of that deal, and the situation was unfolding, until Russia and grain was flowing to the world until Russia started destroying Ukrainian ports and grain infrastructure. So this message about coming out now about British aviation doing intel to preclude Russian strikes on the vessels that participate in the grain deal, they're, I think, sending a message to Turkey as well, that Turkey is failing in their responsibility. And, okay, yeah, if we look at it, Nikolai, even the hits on our grain infrastructure, I will not even call numbers because they were not officially published, but a lot of product was damaged, a lot of capabilities were destroyed. This is changing the rules of war. This is a new operation of Russian military political leadership dedicated to turning hunger into blackmail weapon in order to affect the position of United Nations and positions of other countries. So it's blackmail. It's pure blackmail. And if this new branch of war is starting to develop, how does the West react to that? And the West reacted by dropping more jets and increasing their intel capacity in order to prevent Russian attacks on the grain vessels. And then there is a question to Turkey, guys, when you took this intermediary responsibility on your shoulders, you are a NATO country, right? How come you have failed with your previous effort? And Erdogan here is in a very dual position where he promised to aid Russia to a certain degree in order to continue with the deal. And the United States and Britain come out and say, no, we're not going to go for this. And it's curious because it hasn't been anything like that before. It's the first time during the 18 months. And the Brits are saying that, and Americans, that no worries, then we'll come here and we'll keep an eye on everything that's happening and we'll prevent Russian attacks on the vessels. Yuri, what's your opinion here? Your commentary about Turkey, if you have anything to add. Otherwise, let's go take the next subject. Nikolai, Turkey is doing their traditional political game and trying to milk everything that they can get to, however far they can reach with their hands. So nothing to be surprised about their pragmatic policies and politics. Osman political stance was always dedicated to getting maximum via the minimum they have. And everybody is doing that. China is doing a similar thing. Israel is doing that. So each country that has long-term and short-term interests, they often playing in this way. And it's very sad that we are not the ones playing in that fashion too. I hope we'll be growing more adult and we'll clench our teeth and not come out with loud statements, but rather doggedly pursue our interests. Here, I think it's more specific situation for Ukraine. Very often, I think we're being we're saying that we do not have enough resources. But even with small resources, when you use effectively, what does the world history teach us? Those countries who were in a similar position, when they know their situation, when they don't have much initially, you can still achieve some goals, and then gradually increasing your capacity, start achieving bigger and bigger goals. Even you can start even with smaller resources. And it's not true when you say that we have not enough resources, especially in the military capability and ability to provide some safety. For example, we managed to, also in politically, we have enough resources. Even we got the summit in Jeddah in about a month where everybody came, even China. And so that shows that we're just not dogged in pursuing our interests. We are not an imperial nation. We need to learn that long policies and long politics and long aspirations and goals. Turkey used to be an empire. It's a big country with political traditions, so they can continue pursuing goals over time, and we need to learn that. And we need to cultivate this approach, this long-term strategy approach in Ukraine, and to promote people who can do that. President Zelensky made a statement that Ukraine and Japan are working on dual-sided document dedicated to security. The head of Japanese Foreign Affairs is visiting Ukraine, and during this visit, Japan reaffirms that They are working with international community on international security protocols and is eager to work with Ukraine on developing that strategy further. So as of today, we're working with the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Japan. And this is a big country, right? This is not just a big country, Nikolai, this is also a G7 country, right? And a curious thing to note here, the moment China starts to buck and express their upsetness about something, Japan shows up. Last time when China was also expressing some of their concerns and some of their disagreements, Japanese came again. So we do have an interesting lever, apparently, a different additional or backup route. If China is starting to sing songs on the destroyed Mariupol theater, we should intensify our relations with Japan. Right. I think, Alexei, Japan is undervalued country for our international contacts. Yuri, which country is rightly evaluated for us? Because I think we have some countries that are absolutely undervalued, like relations with Romania, where there are projects for hundreds of $1 billion, grain and other projects. And Japan, I think, is another country that we are completely overlooking in our economic dealings. And it's, I think, what, third economy in the world? This is a very strong counterbalance to China, by the way. And this is a G7 country, the only Asian G7 country. And sorry, yeah, there is a bit of a disconnect here. There is a lag on the video, so sorry for talking over you. And right, Japan is actually starting a big military upgrade program, and Japan is a big ally of the United States. So I think if Ukraine will have good dealings with Japan, good relations with Japan, we might as well benefit from that military upgrade system. And Japan is always looking for additional markets and promotion of their technologies and access to markets, because Ukraine become a very good platform for them. So I think Japan is a very important direction for Ukraine. I think we will be cultivating that. And we have a very good ambassador there, Sergei Korsutsky, a very smart one of the best ambassadors I think we have. There is a silly meme in Ukrainian politics that was popular before the war, but sometimes you can hear that. That basically was saying that if America will misbehave, we will go cooperate with China. I was always laughing at this meme. Why, of course, why first of all talk about that? Second, why go under China? Be friends with Japan. This is a good counterbalance to, they are a good counterbalance to China in the Far East. And given that how they increasingly cooperate with South Korea, and they also have good relations with Australia and India, and with all that, you can have a very interesting geopolitical stance. But in order to pursue these elements in this network, Ukraine needs to start thinking in a bit different fashion. We need to establish our own geopolitical school of thought and try to be more Ukraine-centric in this case, and try to see the world through that prism, how we can promote and balance things. These are two main goals of politicians, to promote and rebalance. And Japan is a country with a very strong potential and resources, and changing their position in the world, changing their vector, we might as well capitalize on it. We might as well increase the numbers of our embassy there. Okay, it's good their foreign affairs minister coming here. Did we go there? Are we doing something? Good questions, Alexey. So here's another publication. Europe Handelsblatt posted an exclusive information that Germany, Italy, Sweden, and Spain have agreed to build a new tank. So I'm curious, such a project in cooperation of 4 countries with rather strong military-industrial complexes, what does it tell us about European future, about European defense future? So this is a very specific situation there, right? Now it's very paradoxical. situation in Europe that Europeans are talking Biden's administration into increasing support to Ukraine, because obviously it's security of Europe dependent on Ukraine. And Biden's administration is winking back and saying, guys, what about yourself? Not all the NATO countries are even spending those 2% for defense. Even Trump back in the day said that fifth article will not be covering those countries who are not spending at least 2% of their GDP for NATO, because many of them for a while got used to not spending money and just sitting on Americans' neck. And now it's interesting, they're starting that new program for artillery shells, new programs for drones, new programs for air defense system, and now tanks. Poland is rapidly refitting their military, because Poles, as the result of this war, observing what's happening, they concluded that they're not ready for the war of that scale, and they need to increase their capabilities. And EU in general started to work, and the problem of building a joint European tank, what is it about? They understood and reconsidered the role of a tank on a battlefield. It did not disappear. There was a popular opinion before that tanks are fading away, but no, this proved to be wrong. This proved to be a kindergarten's opinion. So only a person who had never met a tank on the battlefield face to face can say the tank is phasing out. And even meeting it from a distance of 2 miles, this is a very bad proposition to have it against you. Much better way is when you are on a tank against somebody. And despite the big losses of tanks during this war, and why? Because the tanks are being targeted first. Exactly why? Because they're dangerous and they're strong figures on a battlefield. So Poland is now buying more tanks, and they're thinking forward. They're thinking to localize these tanks and start to produce these models themselves. So EU is also thinking that they need some sort of unified tank. If the war happens, they need a lot of tanks. So who's making tanks? French, Swedes, Italians, Germans, and that's about it. And if you look at it, these countries do participate in this new project. So why EU is existing, right? Cooperation is more beneficial than doing it alone. Eurofighter, with all the problems of this project, they actually succeeded. And I think they calculated that it's cheaper and more effective to build a joint vehicle, one for the whole EU. Because this war also brought up the topic of unification, of standardization very sharply. Because when we found out that 155 millimeters shells for French artillery do not fit German artillery, that's about anything but standardization. And they're now seeing that this is a glaring issue, so they're trying to be more ready for that. This is good, because Europe and NATO were sleeping. They were very fast asleep and were barely even existing. And the military complex is there. And this war woke them up. Now they see how far and how dangerous this war can go. And they understood that their ammo capacity is really pathetic, because Russian army at the beginning of this war, during 5 days, was shelling Ukraine with the annual production number of ammo done together by NATO countries over a year. So this is a glaring issue, and they're now taking collective measures to address that. Also, if they build that factory, that rain metal factory on the territory of Ukraine or territory of Poland, do you think this tank will be used by Ukraine? Or will we be another country that cooperates with them? Our Kharkov tank school still exists, despite that the factory was destroyed. We still have specialists who know how to build these vehicles. So we'll see what happens. An interesting news towards the end of our stream from St. Petersburg, where we learned interesting details about Chinese organized crime in Russia. In St. Petersburg, Chinese organized crime was making money on their own compatriots, and criminal investigation concluded that they had their own criminal group that was making money on their own businessmen. And summing it up, the publication tells that on the territory of Russia, they have Chinese organized crime groups, Chinese groups that essentially deal in Chinese currency, do not care about Russian power, and they continue doing their own business the way they do it. What do you say about that? Well, they do the same thing in the United States as well, too. It was a big scandal just a couple of weeks ago that they had their own undercover, some Chinese police, some Chinese organized crime groups, some Chinese things in their community. This is why they're so different, the aspect they're so different in with Indians, for example, because Indians, they, whenever they become even a CEO of a company, they're India-born businessmen, but they are American citizens. And they have some maybe relations with India, they have some sentiment to that, but they're not porting Indian substructures into American soil. Chinese are different. They are bringing China wherever they go. So this actually is part of that big question looking forward, the conflict of the United States and China. That's part of it. That's why I think our and the Western cooperation with India is going to increase, and Europe and the West will understand the Chinese specifics. And somewhere in the future, there's probably going to be a rather big conflict that will need resolution in terms of China and Chinese citizens trying to create China everywhere. And it's interesting if Europe and the United States will use this current situation, which I think will affect NATO countries and the United States overall whenever there is a conflict with China. So, and Russia will probably play an active role in this conflict too. So it would be smarter to address this conflict in the future by pushing Russia's capability to attack anything, including attacking Europe, 10 to 15 years out. So now they can use this war that Russia started to make sure Russia loses their military capacity, so they are not an active player during the problem resolution with China, so that we would be able to use this window the world can use this window to deal with China, and Russia would still be sitting on the bleachers and not being able to actively participate in that, at least militarily. So that's what I'm saying. Sanctions and military capabilities in Russia need to be destroyed. And we need to increase Poland and Ukraine military capacity to be Eastern shields for Europe. 350,000 of military contingent in Poland and a similar army in Ukraine would be an eastern wall, a very strong wall that is capable to defend Europe from the threats coming from Russia. So I think every smart politician in Europe needs to come to this understanding, and I just am appealing to them to be faster in recognizing this future situation. And of course, building their tank is important, but you can also understand and recognize that having two countries such as Poland and Ukraine as strong players on the eastern side will be your strongest shield against possible military action. And I think we can wrap this stream on this. These are good news that we discussed, unless you have some last minute thoughts. Yuri? No, I agree generally. Great. Subscribe to the channel of Alexey Arestovych, to Yuri Romanenko's channel, and of course to the Privateer Station. If you are watching and listening to that in English, click the like button and support our work. Thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Пока.